everyone, and welcome to the Research Higher Degree seminar series that the Create Centre is very privileged to share with any Research Higher Degree student or other person who's interested. It's my great pleasure this afternoon in a minute to introduce the wonderful Georgia Freebody. But before I do that, I'd just like to acknowledge our First Nations Australians. I'd like to acknowledge just how important story and the arts are important in First Nations cultures to their knowing, their being, their becoming, their doing, and how much we have to learn from that. Also want to acknowledge that they have looked after this country for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and we have so much to thank them for in their care of our country. But to say that the land, wherever you're joining from, was never ceded and always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Just wanted to give a very quick advertisement for the Create Centre, creativity in research, engaging the arts, transforming education, health and wellbeing. And also to say that all of our Research Higher Degree webinars and our other webinars are all on the Create YouTube channel, so that you have that resource and you can have another look at this at any time you like. This afternoon, Georgia Freebody is going to talk to us about her wonderful arts-based research study on therapeutic art play. I encourage you to have a look at Georgia's Padlet, because it is wonderful to look at the range of work that she does. This study in particular is going to be shared with us. We're just going to talk to us a little bit about the research methodology, arts-based research, which is so important, I think, in terms of creative research. And she's also going to share the questions, some of the methodology and the findings. So Georgia, I won't take any more of the time and just pass over to you. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Robin. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate being given the opportunity to present with Create. As I was saying to you before, it's an incredibly vital and rich and playful and knowledgeable space to be able to kind of share ideas and share studies as researchers. So I'm really excited to be able to do that. I'll share my slides.
Yes.
Have you got me?
We've got you.
Beautiful. So this is the research project, my little research project. It's called Therapeutic Art Play, a space for artworking research in a toddler classroom. And I'll introduce myself just a little bit further, just to contextualize a little bit. So I'm an artist, I'm a visual artist. I make art all the time. I'm a teacher. I've taught in lots of different capacities, and I do adult teaching. I teach pre-service teachers. I've taught in Ocean primary schools. I've also taught, but predominantly my expertise is with early learners and in early learning settings and early childhood settings. And I am also an art therapist. The art therapy that I take part in is educational art therapy. So I'm an art psychotherapist. I'm trained, supervised, and registered as an art psychotherapist. But my practice is educational art therapy, which means that my work is mostly process oriented, and it's oriented towards developing strategies for well-being and simultaneously developing those beautiful learning dispositions. And that's my jam, basically. That's my gig. It's not necessarily deficit or diagnosis focused, and it's not outcome oriented. And that's what therapeutic art play is pretty much about as well. And that's what this study does. So I've spoken about this before, but the vehicle for this study was the Therapeutic Art Play program, and this is a program that's running continuously and was running throughout the study, where this is the site where I gathered my data, and this is the site where I researched. If you tuned in last month, I did a presentation on this particular program, and anyone that did tune in, who are here now, there might be some overlap in the content, but this presentation is very much focused on the research into this program. Okay. So this presentation, I've planned to do this. I've planned to start talking about artworking and describe artworking. Artworking is this lovely thing that pretty much is the main finding, or it is the thread through all the findings. And it's also the thing that I think future research, that's where the implications lie, on focusing on this concept of artworking. I'm going to talk about why I chose toddlers. I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to do a brief overview of the research, and I'm going to talk about new materialism, arts-based researching, and nomadic analysis and nomadic artworking, which is kind of the practical application of that new materialist way of being. I'm going to talk about the diffractive analysis that I clumsily put together for this research study, and then I'm going to talk about 3 findings if we have time. As you're probably getting a bit of a feel for what this is, this research study had quite a small scope, and it's not a research study that was concerned with measuring implications or measuring outcomes or even really locating outcomes. This is an exploratory study, and it's about describing and how to experience, synthesize, and express that experience, basically. That's what this research was for. Anyway. So I want to talk a little bit about this thing that is artworking. Artworking is a term that I came up with in the research that I needed to come up with pretty quickly, because it describes an activity, it describes a thing, it's a doing word. It's basically the activity of taking part in process art, or the creative process. And artworking happens at the interface of artists and facilitators and the material world, and it happens through time and in a particular space. So it really is, it's this kind of tangled up, lively thing that happens. It's basically the activity of taking part in your creative flow state. Yeah. And it really beautifully describes the way that toddlers take part in interacting with materials and having an embodied sensory artworking experience. I could have used the word art making, but the word art making has very specific connotations in art therapy. It's a beautiful term. It has to do with being in the space. It's a very sensory and very embodied word, but it still has implications towards making a specific thing. And artworking, really, I love the word working. It talks about it has gravitas. There's an importance to it and an engagement with it. And it also, it's lively. It has a kind of life. It begins, it has a middle, and then it has an ending. It's also a really beautiful place to notice things. It's a place to be, and a way it's a beautiful space to notice our processes and the way that we do things. So it really provides a lovely, critically reflective place for us, which is why it's a lovely thing for educators and art therapists to be able to co-create and be a part of that space. Anyway. So as I said, artworking is the activity or the act of taking part in process art. It's very open-ended. And really importantly, and this is this kind of came through the study really beautifully. Art working is very relational. So in Reggio Emilio terms, we talk about all the different languages that we can bring to this kind of learning space and creating an invitation to learn. When we artwork in the tap space, it's more of an invitation to play where the facilitators and the people around us are very present and very engaged and stay with us in that artworking state. Because it is a place that is as informed by materials and light and place and space, the materials and the place where we are and the country that we're on and all the art materials that we use, they're equal active agents in the artworking space, and their aesthetic characteristics are vital to our artworking and how we experience and synthesize and express. As a result, I want to acknowledge the original Indigenous custodians of the places where we artwork and the materials that we artwork with. And the places that we artwork with. Artworking is about working with instead of working on or using things to work. The country that we work on and the country that we work with is Aboriginal country and was never ceded. It also, it's necessary for me to acknowledge the fact that researching is something that this official research study, the study that I did, was written in adult language, and I'm an adult person writing about and talking about and artworking in a very adult way about people in their toddlerhood, about very, very young artists. And one of the very fine sieves, one of the things that we do as researchers to protect a space for very young children to be and become and belong in a research context is that we rigorously de-identify them. And that can have a very specific effect. And that effect can be to remove some of their personhood. And I want to acknowledge all of the incredible creative capacity of the very, very young artists that I am privileged to work with. And also, I want to acknowledge the incredible care and hard work of the teachers and the staff members that I get to work with in the environments where they care for their toddlers. So why do I work with toddlers? Why did I want to do this study with toddlers? And I've written artworking at the top here. There are a couple of reasons, and they all interact with each other, I think. And I've got to not talk too long on this point. But artwork, I've written artworking, but really, kind of the adult version of that, of artworking, is work ethic, I think. I've never come across, I've worked with lots and lots of different groups of people, different ages, different stages, if you like, different environments, the way we group people for different purposes. I've facilitated artworking in lots of different arenas, and I have never come across a group of people that have the kind of work ethic that toddlers have. They are incredible. They're ravenous in the way that they are needing to work and needing to engage in a very sensory way with the world. And I often make it sound kind of carefree and flamboyant, but oftentimes it's very intentional. It's very focused and very careful work. Their capacity for experiencing and synthesizing and finding ways to express simultaneously the world is remarkable and exciting and hopeful and energizing. And that's one of the reasons that I chose toddlers. And it's also probably one of the reasons that there's a lack of research in this area. And it's incredible to me, given their work ethic, given the amount of output that they provide the people around them, the creative output of a toddler, one toddler, let alone many of them in a setting. But I do see how that might lead to a lack of research in the area, considering the way that research works and the way that toddlers work. I think there's a big difference in the way that research works, and I'm a baby when it comes to research, and the way that toddlers work. And in an early learning setting, a toddler room really is built for adults to manage toddlers, in my opinion. And I think that the lack of research has to do with the sheer velocity at which toddlers work and the way that research takes a certain amount of time. I mean, I think there's lots and lots of reasons, and I'm not going to talk too much into that space unless we want to later, because I think it triggers in me some sort of social justice thing. I'm not sure. But there is a massive lack of research, and that has been noted by many, many people. It's also noted by architects of the new early learning framework. So that's one of the reasons that I wanted to study toddlers. Also, the TAP program was running in a couple of really beautiful toddler rooms, and there was some really, really productive and rich and careful relationships already, where we were doing lots of artworking in toddler settings with lots of toddler people. So I never really wanted to study myself. I always loved research, but never really wanted to research myself until I came across new materialist theory in my master's in art therapy, when I suddenly went, there could be a methodology here with this, in this theory might provide a methodology that would actually let some light in on a toddler's experience of artworking. So I got a little bit excited by that. So I decided to study the toddlers with the toddlers. So the new materialist, so an overview of the research, this might be a bit useful. So this, as I was saying before, this research is very much exploratory research. It was a master's in research, so it was not a huge study. It was between 27 and 30,000 words. It was a cross-school research with art therapy and the School of Education at Western Sydney. I have included a link at the end of the slides that can take you to the Padlet. And if you need more of a breakdown of the nomadic analysis or the new materialism or the diffractive analysis, I've written some pages down there that you can have a look at if you're even interested. I did a diffractive analysis that I had to kind of build myself. So it was this kind of clunky thing, but it was really important to me that it fit. It was fine-tuned to the study, and it needed to be continuously fine-tuned as the study evolved. So the data, because of that, because it was exploratory and it was immersive, the data point, I wanted to try to gather as much data as possible. So I took audio recordings. I didn't take video recordings for lots of reasons, but one of the reasons was that they were intrusive to the art working experience. I took lots of photos. I've gotten pretty adept at taking sneaky little photos that don't get in anyone's way. I took lots and lots of I journaled a lot. I did lots of naturalistic observations. That's a natural part of the TAP program anyway. I gave staff members and teachers questionnaires, which was really rich and beautiful. I did artworking with the groups in the classrooms and in the playground, and I also did nomadic artworking responses. Some of those were responses to what was happening in the TAP space, and some of those were responses to the research. So they're basically where I got my data from, and then sat with my data and continued to journal. Are there any questions from anyone about this? I know that this is a lot. Not particularly. Beautiful.
Not yet.
Okay, I'll crack on. So very simply, because this was a descriptive piece, and I really wanted to tune into what was happening in the TAP program and experience and synthesize and express what was happening authentically to the TAP program with research. The research questions are really simple. So basically, how can this space be described? And how can new materialism describe it? So how can features of a therapeutic art play space designed to facilitate well-being and learning in early childhood best be described? And do new materialist perspectives, methodologies, and practices enhance the process of understanding being, becoming, and belonging within TAP? And if so, in what ways? So really basic research questions. The kind of pillars or the ideas of new materialism that were really rich for this study, they were the way that all active agents, human, non-human, material, light, sound, space, time, were decentralized and then could be re-centered, centralized, and decentralized again. So they were all active agents in the study. There are times when some of them are I recenter them, and then they're able to kind of float and move, but they're all considered as part of the big tangle of artworking that's being studied. What's really, really useful and powerful is this idea of performative interaction between all these different active agents and the way that we act upon each other. And there's this continuous feedback between us. So the way that even the research, the fact that there was a facilitator researching, the research impacts that space. The research is performed by the space. So it affected the artworking affected it. And also the way that the space needed to be compassionately held and deterritorialized and reterritorialized throughout the researching process. A big part of the findings was this agential cut, this idea of an agential cut around the artworking event, the artworking as containment, the artworking, the artworking, kind of the life of the artworking. In art therapy, well, this is one of the findings too. In art therapy, containment is really, really important. It's also important generally in life and in teaching, but it's very, very vital in a therapeutic sense for therapeutic effect. And to be able to re-territorialize a space so that containment could be flexible around the artworking and allow in all of the different roles and relationships in that space, that really allowed TAP to be in an educational setting rather than having to impose itself in that setting. And the core principle of TAP was discovered in that it's relational understanding and the relational practices inside that containment that actually really allow the artworking to shift and change and move around. So new materialism really was a very, very rich bed for this to kind of grow in. So that's the theory, but then of course the theory and the practice need to really marry quite beautifully with this kind of study. There's not a they're not kind of separated by predetermined methodologies and methods. So I was looking at doing a diffractive analysis, and this is kind of where it gets a little bit wiggy, so please bear with me. I did a diffractive and a nomadic analysis. So diffraction, I had done a thematic analysis before, and I really loved the ability of the way that I understood a thematic analysis working to be able to bring aesthetic considerations in and to be able to bring embodied considerations in and to be able to kind of take part in arts-based thematic analysis. And I love the idea of bringing out these kind of core characteristics that thematic analysis can take part in. However, and also a diffractive analysis, and I think this is very, very necessary, allows for difference and allows for one-offs, which are just as important as those core themes. And one of the things that I was really mindful of with the diffractive analysis was that I had this tangled up art experience that was happening, this art working there was this entanglement of people and play schema and lights and sounds and interactions. And what I didn't want to do was start pulling at the tangle and start separating things out of that tangle. I wanted to be able to view them in context, in the milieu, and take into account all of the milieu and the way that things changed as well. So diffractive analysis, as I was reading about it, allows for similarity, and it also allows for difference, and it allows for becoming and change, which is really, really useful when you're trying to hold a space for being and becoming and belonging simultaneously. So diffractive analysis more and more sounded like the kind of thing that I really needed to be able to take part in for this particular, or build for this particular study. And a nomadic analysis being one where that wanders and changes and isn't fixed and doesn't have any kind of predetermination about it. Is actually able to change. And so you can see how this needing to be rigorous and doing a diffractive analysis is very different from being rigorous and doing any kind of other analysis. There's a need for presence and attunement to this kind of space, the space that you're analysing, in order to remain rigorous. And there's not the idea that it would be replicable is almost just irrelevant, because these children, the toddlers that I was working with, they're not going to do the same thing again. So I wouldn't want something that would try to kind of set a foundation in place for them to do the same thing again, because they're not going to artwork in that way ever again. That would be redundant of them to have to do that. Just like at university, you wouldn't do the same course twice. If you've done it once successfully, you wouldn't enroll in it again. Anyway, because there is the becoming that happens. So diffractive analysis allows for that lovely becoming. It's a term that it's a Barradian term. It's a term that Karen Barrard kind of put together, and I think also other people as well. I've got some nice readings that kind of talk about diffractive analysis at the end. And she talks about it in extension to the kind of reflective analysis that happens, these beautiful, reflective analysis that's done, where you hold up a mirror and it reflects the world. The light bounces off the mirror and shows the world as it is. Whereas a diffractive analysis, diffraction talks more about the way that light moves around or is affected by a lens or affected by something when it moves through it, that the way that light diffracts. And that talked to me a little bit too about the way that as a facilitator and as a co-creator with the children in the art working event, the research was very much being diffracted via my process. So I think I just talked into this slide a little bit before. So it highlights change, it highlights the materiality and the responsiveness and the fluidness of the art working event. It really seemed like a really good fit for me. But then I thought I decided I wanted to do a diffractive analysis. I got myself all excited, and then I came to doing it and I had absolutely no idea what to do. I thought, what actually is it? What actually do I do? And I spoke to a whole lot of people. I did a whole lot of reading, and eventually my beautiful supervisor said to me, just start. You have to begin. And I kind of went, that's really good advice, but what do I do? And she said, well, you were talking about color coding. And I said, well, everybody I spoke to about new materialism said new materialists would never color code. And she said, Georgia, you need to start. So I started, and actually color coding was beautiful. I really enjoyed it. I was looking at this constant moving. I sat immersed myself with the data, and I sat with this data, and I kind of churned through it and started by color coding. And the first thing I did was I coded for, and I mean, I don't think it really matters. I thinking about it now, I started coding for different roles and relationships that I noticed at first in the artworking, and the way that materials behaved in a particular way, and the way that the facilitator behaved in a particular way, the way that staff or children behaved in a particular way, the way that time moved. And I started color coding for that. I started color coding for educational behaviors that I noticed, for art therapy practitioner behaviors that I noticed. And then those colors, the colors stayed the same, but they started charting those things changing. And the colors started to map the way that these roles in relationship with each other and the way that relationships were changing throughout the artworking event. And that led me to this really, that the first big kind of finding and realization that that in response to one another, in interaction with materials, with one another, we actually started to allow for more and different things inside that artworking event. But that talks about the first finding, and I'll talk about that in a moment, because I do want to talk about the nomadic artworking. Now, can I just briefly stop? Am I covering things that I need to? Does anyone have any questions?
I think you're doing very well, Georgia.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Georgia.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Good morning, Georgia.
So the nomadic artworking was I thought, one of the kind of standout, lovely, succinct practices that I've carried through with me, actually, as a practitioner, as a researcher, and also just as a TAP practitioner. The nomadic artworking was so there were 3 tiers of artworking in the study. One of them happened in the TAP space with the children and the materials and the staff and the time and space. And that was this lively thing that happened and was being and data was collected during. And then I would bring myself out of that space and I would journal and do the data stuff. And then I would get some materials that were the same materials as I artworked with the in the artworking in TAP, and I would bring them into my artworking space and I would set up a personal invitation to play. And I would have an artworking response with those materials, and I would have it directly resonant with the artworking that I'd just done in the TAP space. So I would be thinking about, because I'd just done some data collection, I would be thinking about the data and I would artwork in similar ways, trying to attune to the kinds of play schema that I saw in the space, and I would artwork that. And that was really eye-opening in a very specific way. And it talked to me so deeply about how useful our bodies are as tools of research, and how useful our central nervous systems are and our senses are as tools of research. It created a really vivid empathic bridge between an embodied bridge between myself and the people that I was researching, and the space that I was researching, and the moments that I were researching. And it also pointed out just how different. The first thing I noticed whenever I was doing it was, this is very different from, this experience is very different. And it also kind of talked to me about all the little nitty-gritty things that happened to my body and my noticing, and which opened my eyes to what it might be like for a toddler, or what it might be like for one of the staff members. So it was just a very, very rich tool, especially for tapping into kind of our tools for empathy, or our empathic tools. So that was fascinating, and it kind of fed the research as well, as datum. Also, while I was researching, I was continuously artworking as well, and that turned into, at first not necessarily something I chose to do, but because I'm an artist and I make art, I found myself just naturally, it became a big part of the art I was just making as part of my personal practice. So that too became part of the data. So I was artworking mindfully. It became very intentional very quickly, in response to the research unfolding. So I can talk briefly about the findings. How are we going for time, Robin? Are we all right?
Yep.
Okay.
We're nearly 20 to 5, so
Okay. Well, I've spoken about the findings before as well on the last, in my last presentation. And I started talking before about noticing, being able to map and notice the roles and the relationships in the room and how they started to change and how that changed moved through the research over the sessions that I was artworking, but also through the artworking events themselves, through the tangle of artworking events. And for example, the way that we put materials out as educators is very different from the way that we introduce materials as art therapists, very different for different purposes, but also in different ways. And it's again very different from how the TAP space puts out creates invitations to play, and there's a real, in the TAP space, it's not necessary that everybody gets the same thing. It's not necessary. It happens sometimes, but it's not necessary. It's not necessary for everyone to approach materials the same way. It's not necessary that we keep materials or we hoard materials, or there's a spirit of abundance. Often the word yes is said more often than the word no or redirection happens. And when materials are paired back, it's because the materials have indicated to the facilitator that they're done, that they're finished. So I started to notice how that changed relationships and roles between people, between the children, the way the children would collaborate with each other, bounce off each other, way the play schema became about asking for more or about accessing materials in a particular way, and also the way that the teachers and the children started interacting about the materials. So there were lots of ways that I was able to plot change or notice change happening differently. And also the fact that I, as a facilitator, learnt to be able to see the way that artworking unfolded and allow for relationships, all of the relationships that needed to be in that space to come into that artworking event, so that I could kind of create containment around that. So often as a art therapist, there's some tried and true and beautiful ways of protecting space for your client to work, that you would never do in TAP. Because TAP needs to be able to accept and make space for all of the things that are relevant, vital in a toddler room, say, or in that educational space. So that was the first finding, was that I was able to open up that artworking space for more than just facilitator and to meet the needs of the child with the staff assisting. It was more like I was able to bring in all of those relationships, and therefore contain it quite safely around that, noticing the life of the artworking event and being able to contain that. So containment was the second thing, and being able to kind of create an agential cut around that, so that became the artworking event itself, the birth and the life, and then the ending of the artworking event becomes contained. And then the third finding, even though these findings are very related to each other and they can be kind of viewed through each other, the third finding was very much about noticing the kinds of practices that we all took part in nurturing and carrying and containing that artworking event. And those practices are deep noticing, deep presence, and being able to attune. And so that idea of attunement, which is, the psychoanalytic idea of from attachment theory, but that is very much about kind of the adult to child, or the relationship between adult and child. This attunement is more about all of us attuning to the artworking, and all of us kind of being able to attune to the materials deeply, and being able to, because the materials will attune to us, and so us being able to attune to each other, and then slipstream in and out of that. And that's kind of how we can co-create without imposing or intervening or kind of, or even encouraging in any kind of coercive way. We are able to slipstream in and be a part of it and co-create that artworking event together. So as you can probably imagine, the scope of this is pretty small. It's deep and it's rich, but it wasn't a huge study by any means. It was 4 artworking events, and it was, 27,000 words or something like that. But it was a very close look at some really rich experiences, and it was a close description of very rich experiences, with a pretty clunky methodology, bespoke methodology that really suited the study, and really did a beautiful job of getting me to the end. But it's not replicable, but it wouldn't want to be replicable. It doesn't mean that there aren't some pretty rich implications, I think. And there's beautiful implications here, I truly believe, in kind of giving us some new and different, and giving us some space as well. The tap is a beautiful way of creating some space especially in a room where there's not a lot of space, for how we can facilitate for artworking for children, how we can facilitate for more and different ways to learn and develop strategies for well-being. But also there's some lovely implications for research, how to research with more and different kinds of people in more and different kinds of spaces. And I think there's a lot of implications for art therapists and the way that art therapists might be able to open up their ideas about containment in different settings and being able to kind of reach people in lots of different settings. There's also, I think, some beautiful implications for contemporary artists to learn from the artworking of toddlers. As one thing that we know contemporary artists really, really are sparked by is the idea of capturing that spontaneity and keeping it. And toddlers have got it all. They've got all the spontaneity. And so there's some really lovely things in there, I think, for contemporary artists. And I think there's lots of implications for environmental justice and environmental, and especially with the new materialist stuff, because I know that when I bring materials in, they all are approached with joyful fascination in a way, even materials that there are triggers around for me as an adult who's lived with, say, plastic waste or anything like that. And plastic, they're all approached with this kind of sensory fascination, similar to cut flowers or whatever. So I think that there's a lot of energy and hope in this space with people in their toddlerhood. I think they've got a lot to show us and to teach us. There's a lot that we can learn with them. So yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you very much for listening and tuning in. Yeah.
Georgia, thank you.
Yeah, there's some links and it's so very basic refs for you if you're interested.
I think they're not just very basic, and I think you shouldn't be apologetic in any way. It is an amazing study, very rich, and as you say, lots of really important implications and ways to take these findings forward, in a sense. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Now we have about 10 minutes. If anyone would like to make a comment or ask a question, we're a small enough group for you to do that. Just unmute and ask away or comment away.
Thanks, Georgia, for a wonderful presentation. And I'm sorry I was a few minutes late. I got held up, of course, on the way to get to my computer. Um, my expertise, I'm an art educator, and I've recently done some study in art therapy as well. And I'm really, like, at the moment, trying to explore, there's so many intersections within the two areas of expertise that I really believe can enhance the conversation in both directions. So being able to hear about your work today has been so rewarding and insightful. Thank you so much. Just on the question of materials, we've been doing a project called Transformative Repair, which focuses on getting young people to view damage in a more compassionate and insightful way so they can sort of start to negotiate some of the challenges of our contemporary world. And in that, we do an art making thing and we deliberately stick to very non-traditional basic art materials. So to kind of decolonize, I suppose, that idea of what is traditional art materials, meaning you've got to be traditionally skilled to use them. So we just give pipe cleaners and tape and tissue, and we're working with students from ages upper primary to middle secondary. And each time we do it, they just click and they just go into the activity and they're so happy.
Isn't that great? How
Yeah,
fabulous.
yeah. So I just wanted to share that as well.
That's so cool. Yeah, no, I often kind of in the couple of lectures that I do, I have kind of the question, well, what is an art material and what is not an art material? What can be an art material? It really is a critically reflective kind of question where we've got to reflect on, why we wouldn't. Because really anything can be an art material, which is what everything has an aesthetic characteristic, and everything can be, if you work with like very young people, you can set up a beautiful invitation to play and they'll spend a good 10, 20 seconds playing with the materials you bring in. But very soon that same exploration, sensory exploration, translates to the floor, to the wall, to the carpet, to their friends. Everything is an art material, everything. And you may have sparked that sensory exploration, but it needs to drift. And so what exactly is an art material? It's anything with an aesthetic characteristic that can be worked with. And so it's a lovely idea that we bring in things like scissors and sponges and if you're working with slightly older kids, skewers, and how can these things be interact with each other to kind of create an evocative expression of an experience. And I think that that's a really lovely idea, is kind of breaking down the more traditional art materials are delicious. They're yummy, they're amazing. But yes, they do hold a kind of, formulaic gravitas that can be really problematic. Especially if you're an artist and you go and study art therapy, one of the first things you have to do is unlearn a lot of these judgments and kind of, so I think that's lovely that you're doing that at in that stage and age, because it really frees people up to be a lot more to approach the materials, as though they're friendly.
We've also worked with teachers, and we've found that you're just giving people permission by making that space where they are allowed to play with a pipe cleaner and some yarn, and they'd be correcting a pile of VCE essays, but they're there and they're loving it. And then you go, oh, it's time to stop now, and they're still going. It's like,
Yeah,
it's just so good.
it's very cool. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. That's so cool. I love it.
Okay.
Hi, Georgia.
Oh,
I just want to ditto some of those remarks and just say thank you for, again, sharing that, because I think, I listened to your previous presentation and your idea of artworking has really like really started to flip my thinking around language of how we talk about art making, and this idea of artworking. I've been playing with it and sitting with it and kind of undoing it and building it back up and kind of
Yes.
reframing it in lots of different ways. So I would like to thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, enjoy.
But I think there's a word that you used in this session this afternoon, and this idea of attunement. And there's just something, I don't know, I've heard you talk about it before, and I've read your work, and but this idea of attunement is something, if there's a thread for me in that I just need to keep pulling. And I think and I've written down some other language that kind of explains it, but I keep coming back to this idea of frequency, that there's this kind of a frequency that happens between you when you are working with the material. And I've been in my studio with my niece today, and listening to you talk about giving toddlers permission, and it's taken me literally all day for her to find her place to just make an artwork that wasn't controlled, that wasn't contrived, that wasn't kind of needed to be something, and she's now, I had to show her a picture of her when she was probably 1.5, in my studio with paint head to toe all over everything. But she needed to see that to remind herself that she can just paint. It doesn't have to look like something. And so when you were talking about, working with toddlers, in my head, because my frame is in a high school perspective, but also in that pre-service teacher space, giving people that kind of that space, it belongs to everyone. It belongs to you and I when we're making our own artwork, Jar Jar. But it needs to be this idea that we need to be attuned with whatever is happening or going on. But this, like I said, there's this kind of this idea of frequency that's coming out. And I'm aligning it to what you were saying about this the agenticness of material. Well, materials have got their own, agency as well.
Yes.
So this idea of frequency and attunement, there's a little tingle that's kind of just starting.
It's massive. No, I don't think it's little. I think it's huge.
No, but in my thinking, it's a little fizzle, and it's just starting to kind of.
I think there's all these questions about where's AI going to take us, and I love AI. I talk to AI all the time. I'm always chatting to AI and kind of and making jokes. AI made me laugh the other day. Told a joke. I got the shock of my life. So this is problematic. I'm shutting it down. I'm going for a walk. No, but it was quite wonderful. But I actually think I'm not worried even slightly, because there's no interface material world. There isn't. And what you're talking about is the attunement when you really pay, and it's about deep noticing. Deep noticing triggers it. And whatever you can do, like Didiri or whatever your thing is, to get into that state where you start to really attune to materials. And when I think about it, and it's a visual thing, it's very much it's fluid, because I work a lot with water and ink and salt and that kind of thing. And it very much is that kind of very close kind of a material. It's in the material interface, and that really helps me with attunement. Not everybody is like that. People are different, and they all tune in different ways, and they become attuned in different ways. But I do think it's, like you said, I do think it's there for everyone. And I do think you can start to attune and start to become attuned. And what I see all the time now is I see people slipstreaming. So I think slipstreaming is something that I see it all the time now, but I don't think I'm very good at I think I'll get better at describing it. But really good teachers, I see them slipstreaming. And that to me is, if you can slipstream in with, and it's often when I'm training TAP, assistants and facilitators, I look first at the way they make art with children, and often they do adult marks parallel to the children's marks. Whereas if you're slipstreaming in, you're making marks with the materials and with the children in very different ways.
Yeah.
And it's not about the skills that you have developed as
No.
an adult with a brush and paint. It's about tuning into that actual moment and the materials in the moment. And
Mm.
it's
Yeah.
a lovely thing.
Yeah, it's just such a lovely, the phrasing of it. There's something really rich in that phrasing of it that
Well,
just
it's many directional too. It's not you attuning to me, it's
no.
tuning to it to all together. It's
Yeah,
a simultaneous thing that happens
yeah,
with
yeah.
material, peoples, and things. And that's that lovely new materialist diffractive analysis thing that allows for more than just a linear. It's complex. It's not complicated.
No.
This happens, then this happens, then this happens. It's these things happen because these things are happening. You know
Mm.
what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Bit trippy. It's a bit trippy.
No. Well, I mean, I think this is what ABR tries to do, isn't it? It tries to put language to these moments that we have that, that are often undescribable because they are deeply felt, deeply noticed. And sometimes, and I talk about this in my research, that language just, for me, language fails me. I'm not articulate enough, or I don't find that the
But
way
maybe
that
it's not there. Maybe it's in the painting of it. Maybe
that's
it's in the
exactly
doing.
it. That's
Maybe
exactly, and that's where you and I align, Georgia. And
Yeah.
you talk about it being nomadic. I talk about it being art-based research or research-based art. We're talking around, a very similar kind of thing. But yeah, thank you for sharing this afternoon.
Oh,
Yeah.
I could talk forever.
I know.
You
I
guys.
can listen forever.
Well, sadly, we'll have to postpone more talk for another time. But Georgia, it has been wonderful to hear more about your research, and yeah, you've got me thinking about it all in lots of different ways too. So, really appreciate your work in preparing this and the opportunity to listen to you.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you. It's lovely to find folk. Thank you.
Thank you for coming today. And I think we're having another webinar in 8th of May, I think, with Olivia Carollas. So anyway, see you again soon. And thanks.
Thank you.